Hi everyone, my name's Hazel and I'm an author and a PhD student, and in today's video we're going to be talking about how to end your novel. So I did a video a couple of weeks ago that was about how to open your novel, the different ways you could do it. So we're going to be doing the ending of the novel today, and I'm just going to talk about some of my favourite novel endings as well as some tips of what to do and what not to do. So let's get started. So the most common mistake I hear people make with their endings, and I'm guilty of this too, is rushing it. And I understand why authors, myself included, do it. You're so close to the end, especially if this is your first novel, you're so close to finishing it. It's a huge achievement to finish writing a novel for the very first time. It's so fulfilling, so you're so close to the end, you can see it, so you want to rush to get there and do it quickly. However, don't do that. Stay chill, stay calm, keep going with the same pace you have with the rest of the novel. The reader will notice, and even my book, so my novel came out October 2019, and all the reviews I got for it were really good. Not to brag, but all the reviews I got for it were really good, but I think out of all the ones I've read, because I haven't read every single review for my novel, 2 of them said they felt the ending was a bit rushed. And although I disagree with them because I knew what the original ending was, so my book, original first ever draft, the one I sent to my publisher, was 25 chapters long. And there's the big climax in chapter 23, a massive argument the main character has with her mum in chapter 24, and then everything else was just in chapter 25 to finish it all off. And then it ends on a cliffhanger. I sent that to my publisher. She really liked it, obviously, that's why she published it. But she did say one of the things I needed to work on was the ending, so we came up with a plan together of how I wanted the ending to go. And as a result, I do believe the climax is still around like the chapter 23 to 25 mark, but now the book is actually 31 chapters long, so the ending was extended by 6 chapters. And to be fair, those chapters, apart from the argument she has with her mum, which is still in there, those chapters are all very short chapters just because of the nature of the ending. If you haven't read the book, you won't understand that. I don't want to spoil it for you, obviously. So the chapters are short, which makes it seem like it's a quick ending, but a lot of the sentences are really long and have the same amount of words in each sentence, which, if you don't know, is a technique that some people use, and it makes you read it slower. Your brain notices the amount of words in each sentence kind of unconsciously and picks up on it. If you have loads of short sentences, you read them quite quickly, but if you have a lot of long sentences with a similar number of words in them, it really slows down the pace you're reading at. And there's also a lot of other things added into the ending. So if I compare the original ending of my novel to the new ending, whilst the same sort of thing happens, like the same conclusion is reached by the end of the last chapter, it was a lot slower, but obviously people still perceived it to be rushed. I guess it was a minority of people who perceived it to be rushed out of all the people who read it, but it's still, I guess, an issue with the book that people still think the ending is rushed, even though the ending takes place over 6 chapters. So rushing is definitely a common mistake, so I know it's really tempting to just go straight forward, want to finish the novel, but just chill and keep going at the same pace. You've probably heard this about a lot of books. If you've ever discussed a book with someone, they'll be like, oh yeah, it was a really good book, I was really enjoying it, but the ending felt rushed. It's a common thing. So it's not the end of the world, but it is a really common mistake, so try your best not to do it. But if this is the first time writing a novel for you, you probably will end up doing it anyway, unless you have amazing self-control. In that case, I congratulate you because I'm very jealous. But I wouldn't be too hard on yourself if you get feedback from someone that says it's too rushed, because even really great famous authors who've been doing it for a while still get that said about their writing. So don't worry about it too much, but try not to do it anyway. So speaking of my novel, it has one of my favourite endings that I see in novels, which is called a cliffhanger. So I think we all know what a cliffhanger is. It's done all the time in TV shows, especially things like British soap operas, so like Coronation Street, my favourite, EastEnders, Emmerdale, Hollyoaks. It's also done quite a lot in films, like in the original Italian Job, and it's also done quite a bit in books as well, including my book. However, if you are just writing a single standalone book, it can be quite frustrating to leave it on a cliffhanger. So try not to do that unless you kind of want the same effect that, for example, the original Italian Job goes for. Unless you want something like that, I would try to avoid it if it's just a standalone book. But my book is part of a trilogy, so the first one ends on a cliffhanger, the second one is also going to end on a cliffhanger, and then the final book would not end on a cliffhanger because it's the last one. I think it's just, I know it's probably like a really cliche and typical and nothing particularly unique about a cliffhanger ending, but I really like it. It makes the reader leaving wanting more, and you know, it generates a lot of discussion between your readers about what could happen next, and that's obviously a lot easier to do these days on websites like Goodreads, for example, where readers can have a discussion about a certain book and they can speculate about what's going to happen next. Now the cliffhanger can be some sort of action, but I think actually I prefer dialogue as a cliffhanger, sometimes like a question. So the final line of my novel is a single word of spoken dialogue with a question mark. You'll have to read it to find out what that single word of dialogue is, but I feel like asking that question, I don't know, I find it quite effective. I really enjoy it, but I also really enjoy dialogue. If you read my book, expect there to be chapters just full of characters talking to each other with not much action, because I love dialogue so much. I love writing it so much. I'm autistic, so most of the time I stay silent and watch everyone else around me and learn how to talk like a normal person from them, and then also apply that dialogue in my books. So the next kind of ending that I really like is an ambiguous ending. So ambiguous can also end on a cliffhanger. A lot of some of these endings will kind of like merge into one. You can kind of have you can have an ending that kind of falls into several of these categories. And by ambiguous, I don't mean unresolved. That's something different we're going to get onto later. An ambiguous ending is, for example, like the end of The Great Gatsby. Everything in the book has been resolved, albeit not happily. It's all been resolved in some way, shape or form. However, the last line of the book, which I cannot remember for the life of me, Google the ending if you want, it will not spoil the book for you. Since it's so ambiguous, I would argue it doesn't always make the most sense. But the ending of The Great Gatsby in particular is really well done because it is ambiguous. It generates a lot of emotion, and because it is ambiguous, it kind of leaves the reader some time to reflect on this book they've just read and also on what that ending actually means. The next ending is another of my favourites, and it's called a circular ending, but you may have heard this ending referred to as other things, for example a tied ending, or sometimes called book ending, where the start of the novel or the film or TV show or whatever mirrors the end of it, and it usually mirrors it by putting the character back in the same situation they started in, but as a different person. So my favourite example of this is in the film Robots, which is about some robots, and it has Ewan McGregor voicing the main character Rodney. It is a children's film, however it is very good. If you're here from my Miraculous Ladybug videos, you probably know by now, I really enjoy watching things made for children. Why? I don't know. I just really enjoy them. Maybe it's because I'm just stressed all the time and I don't want to watch things made for adults even though I'm 24. I don't want to watch them all the time because they can also be kind of harrowing and depressing. So I watch children's things as a way to relax, essentially. So in Robots, if you don't know what it's about, Rodney is from a tiny town in this made-up world called Rivertown, and he wants to be an inventor really badly, and he wants to travel to the big city and work with Big World, who's like the inventor in charge of all the upgrades for the robots. But he doesn't have enough money to travel to Robot City, and even though he's confident with his inventions, he's not really sure he has what it takes to make it. However, his dad does believe in him and he buys him the ticket to get to Robot City. His dad had a similar path in that he wanted to be a musician, but his dad, Rodney's grandfather, said no and got his son fitted to be a dishwasher. They're robots, so I know this scene's a bit weird, but they are robots, please remember that. So Rodney goes to the city. I won't spoil exactly what happens, but obviously it's a children's movie, so Rodney and his friends and Big World triumph. He achieves his dream, he helps so many robots. At the end of the film, he comes back to Rivertown to help his dad's dreams come true. He has come full circle, he's developed as a character, and now he's going home to show his parents what he's done and make them proud of him. And it feels like a really earned ending. Rodney has earned this for himself and he wants to go home and make his dad proud of him. It's a really, really satisfying ending because, like I said before, it's earned and we see all this growth and development in Rodney. Yes, it's a really typical ending, but it's really good because it's so satisfying to see. Of course, if your book is a series or a trilogy, you might not do a circular ending until, for example, if it's a trilogy, right until the end of the third book. It might be a bit odd to do a circular ending just in the first book. It might be better to do the circular over the course of all the books. But if it's just a standalone book, I do feel like a circular ending works really, really well. Because they're in the same location, but we kind of see how the experience has transformed them as a person, and it just really goes to show as well how good you will be as a writer at character development, which is really, really important. The next kind of ending I want to talk about is an epilogue. Now, I haven't actually ever read that many epilogues. The only epilogue I've ever read in a book, I believe, is the ending to Harry Potter, the 19 years later. I try not to mention Harry Potter anymore because of J.K. Rowling and that mess. We'll just call it that mess because I don't even know how else to describe it at this point. So I've tried not to talk about Harry Potter since all of that went on. I'm not really sure people talk about it anymore, but I try not to mention it too much anymore. However, that is the only epilogue I've ever read. And the only epilogues I've ever written have all been for Harry Potter fanfictions back when I was like 16. So, and all the other epilogues I've ever read have actually all been in fanfictions, Harry Potter or otherwise. I don't see them get done a lot, and I do kind of feel like they are a bit of a weak ending sometimes. But I feel like for the use in Harry Potter, because of how long the series was and how much people loved it, especially at the time the final book was released and when the final film was released as well, there was a lot of nostalgia to it, and we wanted to see them all properly have a happy ending. At the end of the Battle of Hogwarts, yeah, Voldemort's been defeated, but these children haven't been given any closure, and that's exactly what they are, they're children. I do feel in both the books and the films there isn't enough emphasis on how they are all feeling mentally. I can't imagine having to do that when I was a teenager. I went through some not always the best stuff when I was a teenager and just a child in general, and I still haven't like fully recovered from it, even though I've had counselling several times now. So I do feel like that 19 years later was kind of to show everyone like, yeah, they are okay now. Maybe not completely okay, maybe not 100% happy, but it looks like they're gonna be okay. It does give kind of a resolution to the story, but honestly I would avoid using it unless your book has been particularly harrowing, or if it's been quite a long series that's been going on for a while and now it's kind of nostalgic to your readers. The next ending I'm going to talk about is the resolved ending, which is fairly self-explanatory. Tie up all of the plots, make sure it's all resolved, and don't do it all immediately in like the same chapter within 5 pages, because that's odd and suspicious. Unless you're writing a book that's intentionally funny and things are just a bit weird, go wild with it. But otherwise make sure you do it gradually as you go, and if you've planned enough and it's a, you know, a good tight plan, you shouldn't have any plot holes, so there shouldn't be anything weird or out of the ordinary that you need to tie up. I don't like anything going unresolved, even if it's something tiny. I find it extremely unsatisfying. Try and resolve everything, and on that note, I hate unresolved endings. Just in general, I hate them. I don't like things that are left unresolved. That's why I never read fanfictions that look like they're never going to get updated, because I can't let myself go through that, okay? I can't do that to myself. I always need to know what happens. But just a quick note on unresolved endings. They are usually happy, but they don't have to be. When I say a resolved ending, I mean so everything is tied up and everything makes sense. But you don't have to make everyone happy. As long as it's resolved and everything makes sense, I'll be happy. But you know your book the best and what's going to suit it. If you feel like it's good to leave something unresolved, then yeah, I guess go for it. I mean, for example, in my novel there are things unresolved in it, but it's the first in a trilogy. So if this is a standalone book, please Please resolve everything. If it's a trilogy or a series, I would advise resolving some things, but obviously not everything, because if you resolve everything, what's the next book gonna be about? A big load of nothing. So don't resolve everything if it's a trilogy, but try and give some closure. Don't leave it completely open with nothing resolved. So we're coming to the end of the video now, and just like an overall tip I have for endings. In general, no matter what way you are gonna end your novel in, I would advise you strongly to not write your ending first. I know some people get really excited about the ending, I am one of these people, but you're going to make your life so much more difficult if you write it first. Do not write it first, okay? And I'm saying this because you don't know exactly how your novel will end. Let me explain. You may plan to have a certain kind of ending. You may plan for something specific to happen in the end. However, no matter how good your plan is, just remember, when you write a novel, you are not in charge. Your characters are in charge. They will just go off and have random conversations with people, and you'll just have to go along with it. And your characters will change as you write them, as they slowly develop themselves. If you're a good enough writer, you don't need to plan for character development. They'll just kind of do it, you know? So if you write the ending first and you really like it, but by the time you get there, that ending no longer makes sense for the characters you've ended up with because you didn't account for this change in your characters, it's gonna make that ending, it's gonna be really hard to knit it up to the rest of the story. So don't do it. You should definitely plan for an ending because it's gonna help with the pace of your novel. I wouldn't advise starting your novel if you don't have an end in sight. I wouldn't advise that at all. I wouldn't advise that at all. You need to know how it ends so it can set the pace of the rest of your novel. But if the end changes as you go along and write it, that's fine, because you're writing, if it's good enough, if you've been doing this for a while, it should kind of take it all into account and adjust the pace accordingly. So I wouldn't worry too much about it. It's kind of like an unconscious thing you end up doing, but just please, for the sake of your own sanity, don't write the ending first, okay? Don't do it. So to end the video, to round up all of the tips: 1. Don't write the ending first. 2. Don't do an epilogue. And 3. Don't rush. You gotta start strong, you gotta stay strong, and you gotta finish strong, okay? Just keep going, alright? The opening and the ending and the middle of the novel are all as equally as important to the person reading it. The opening of the novel is of course the first impression, and it determines whether they're going to read the rest of the novel. I know there are some people who are like, once I start a novel, even if it's not good, I'm going to finish it. I'm not one of those people. I watched the first 10 minutes of a television series the other day and I stopped watching it, and I'm never going to watch it again because it was rubbish. I couldn't even force myself to sit through the full hour-long episode because I was like, the first 10 minutes were rubbish. That's what the opening's got for me. I don't care what the rest of it's got for me. So I'm just gonna leave it at that. The biggest chunk of the novel, the middle part between the opening and the ending, has to keep the reader interested to keep them reading, and the ending has to be really, really good, really strong, because it's gonna leave a lasting impression on the reader. It's going to determine whether they recommend this book to people they know. It's going to determine whether they read the next in the series, if it's a series, or if they're going to read anything else from you. So your ending has to be really strong. It's okay to experiment with multiple endings as long as you decide on what is the best one for you. You can do as many drafts of your novel, or just the ending, or just the opening, or just chapter 6, for example, if that's what you need to get it good. It all has to be good, but the ending is what's going to leave a lasting impression on the reader. So you've come a long way, especially if this is your first novel. Finishing a novel for the first time is a huge achievement, so you got to stay strong. You've come so far. Don't fall down at the last chapter, the last paragraph, the last line. Keep going, you got this. So that was all for today, and I feel from looking in the camera, I didn't wear my glasses for today's video, that this foundation colour is ever so slightly too dark for me. Maybe it's because I'm showing all this other skin on my chest, but now I feel like it's too dark. Do I look like an Oompa Loompa? Please let me know in the comments. But that was all for today. You all better have a good day. That was a threat. I hope you all stay safe, and I will see you all next time. Bye!